The snow was falling harder than it had all winter, and Michael Chen stood outside Romano's Deli with his last $5 bill crumpled in his fist. Through the fogged window, he could see his 8-year-old daughter Emma sitting at their usual corner table, her homework spread across the scratched formica surface, her small shoulders hunched as she worked by the dim light. The deli had been their refuge for months now, the only place warm enough where Emma could do her schoolwork, while Michael washed dishes in the back for whatever Sal could afford to pay him under the table. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Michael pressed his forehead against the cold glass, watching his daughter chew on her pencil eraser, completely absorbed in her math problems. She had no idea that today might be their last day here. Sal had pulled him aside earlier, his weathered face creased with sympathy and regret. "I'm sorry, Mike. The health inspector's coming next week, and if they see you working without papers, without being on the books..." He trailed off, both men understanding what couldn't be said. Sal couldn't afford the fines, couldn't risk losing his license. Michael had nodded, grateful for the months of work, trying not to think about where they'd sleep when the shelters filled up again. That's when he noticed her, a woman sitting alone at the bus stop across the street, her thin coat inadequate for the brutal wind that whipped through the narrow alley. She wasn't wearing gloves, and her hands were pressed together, breath visible in small puffs as she tried to warm her fingers. Her suitcase, battered and held together with duct tape, sat beside her on the bench. Even from a distance, Michael could see her shivering, the kind of bone-deep cold he recognized all too well from their own nights spent in places that never quite got warm enough. Without really thinking about it, Michael pushed open the door to the deli, the little bell chiming as he entered. Emma looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that could light up a room, even when everything else felt dark. "Daddy, I'm almost done with my fractions. Mrs. Davidson says I'm getting really good at them." "That's great, sweetheart," Michael said, his hand automatically going to her shoulder, a gesture of comfort he'd developed since they'd been on their own. He glanced back at the window, at the woman who was now standing, stomping her feet slightly, clearly trying to generate some warmth. "Emma, what do you think about sharing our dinner tonight?" Emma followed his gaze to the window. "With the lady at the bus stop. She looks cold." Emma considered this seriously, the way she always did when faced with questions about fairness and kindness. It was something Michael admired about his daughter, how she never just nodded along with what adults said, but actually thought things through. "We don't have much," she said finally, "but we have enough to share, right?" Michael's chest tightened. They were about to order their usual a single sandwich split between them and a cup of soup they'd share with 2 spoons. Paid, or with their last few dollars. Tomorrow, he didn't know where their next meal would come from, but Emma was right. They had enough to share, at least for tonight. "Yeah, baby, we do." Michael walked back outside, the cold hitting him like a physical force. The woman looked up as he approached, her eyes wary but not unkind. Up close he could see that she was probably in her 30s, with dark hair that fell in waves around her face. Her clothes were clean but worn, the kind of worn that came from traveling, from making things last longer than they were meant to. "Excuse me," Michael said, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "My daughter and I were about to have dinner, and we were wondering if you'd like to join us. It's warm inside, and the soup isn't bad." The woman stared at him for a moment, clearly surprised. "I don't have any money," she said quietly. "That's okay, our treat." She looked past him toward the deli window, where Emma had gone back to her homework, but kept glancing up every few seconds, obviously curious about their conversation. "I don't want to intrude on your family time." "You wouldn't be." Actually, Michael found himself saying, My daughter's been working on a project about different places around the world. If you're from somewhere else, she'd probably love to hear about it." This seemed to ease something in the woman's expression. "I'm Sarah," she said. "Sarah Martinez. And yes, I'd love to get out of this cold. Thank you." The three of them squeezed into the corner booth, Emma immediately scooting over to make room, her natural curiosity overcoming any shyness. Sal appeared at their table, wiping his hands on his apron, giving Michael a questioning look. "3 minestrones and a pastrami sandwich," Michael said, "to share?" Sal nodded and disappeared back to the kitchen. Sarah unwrapped her scarf, revealing a small silver locket that caught the light. Emma noticed it immediately. "That's pretty," she said. Sarah smiled, her fingers going to the locket automatically. "It was my grandmother's. She always said it would bring me good luck someday." "Has it?" Sarah laughed, but there was a sadness in it. "Not yet, but I'm still hopeful." As they waited for their food, conversation came easier than Michael had expected. Sarah told them she was traveling from Chicago, that she'd been staying with a cousin who'd helped her get back on her feet after a difficult divorce. She was careful about the details, clearly not wanting to burden them with too much of her story, but Emma's questions were direct in the way only children's questions could be. "Where are you going?" "I'm not entirely sure yet. Somewhere warmer, I hope." "Do you have kids?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. No, just me. "Do you like kids?" Sarah looked at Emma seriously. "I love kids. I used to work at a community center in Chicago, teaching cooking classes to teenagers." Emma's eyes lit up. "You know how to cook?" "I do. My abuela taught me when I was about your age. She had this little restaurant in Mexico City, and I spent every summer there learning her recipes." When the food arrived, they ate slowly, savoring both the warmth and the company. Sarah asked Emma about school, about her favorite subjects, about what she wanted to be when she grew up. Emma talked about wanting to be a teacher, maybe, or a scientist, or possibly both. She'd learned to adapt her dreams to whatever seemed possible in the moment, another trait that made Michael's heart ache with pride and worry. "What about you?" Sarah asked Michael. "What kind of work do you do?" Michael hesitated. The truth was complicated, involving a startup that had collapsed, savings that had evaporated, a series of odd jobs that barely covered the basics. "Right now, I help out here in the kitchen when Sal needs an extra hand. Before that, I was in tech, but the company went under." Sarah nodded without judgment. "The economy's been rough. A lot of good people are struggling right now." They talked about the city, about the best places to find work, about the strange way neighborhoods could change from block to block. Sarah had an easy laugh and a way of listening that made both Michael and Emma feel heard. When Emma started yawning, curling up against her father's side, Sarah glanced at the clock above the counter. "I should probably get going," she said. "My bus comes in about an hour." "Where does it go?" Emma asked sleepily. "Boston, I think. Or maybe Portland. I haven't decided yet." Michael felt the weight of the moment, the strange intimacy of sharing. A meal with someone whose story intersected with theirs for just this brief time. "Thank you," he said to Sarah, "for the company and for making Emma smile. It's been a rough week." Sarah gathered her things, tucking her scarf back around her neck. As she stood to leave, she paused, looking down at Emma, who was nearly asleep. "Take care of your dad, okay? He's a good man." Emma nodded seriously. "I will." Sarah turned to Michael, extending her hand. When he shook it, she pressed something into his palm. He looked down to see a business card, worn at the edges, with a phone number written on the back in careful handwriting. "If you're ever in New England," she said softly, "and you need anything at all." Michael pocketed the card, not looking at it closely, not wanting to embarrass her by seeming to judge whatever job she might be heading toward. "Thank you, Sarah. Good luck." She smiled, shouldered her bag, and headed for the door. Through the window, they watched her. Cross the street back to the bus stop, her figure small against the falling snow. Michael paid Sal, counting out the bills carefully, leaving just enough for a tip. "Nice lady," Sal commented, clearing their table. "Yeah," Michael agreed. She was. That night in the shelter, as Emma fell asleep on the narrow cot beside him, Michael pulled out the business card Sarah had given him. In the dim light, he couldn't quite make out what it said, but he held onto it anyway, tucking it into his wallet next to the few remaining bills. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own uncertainty. But tonight, they'd shared a meal with someone who'd needed warmth as much as they did, and somehow that felt like something worth holding on to. Before you jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months had passed since that snowy night at Romano's Deli, and Michael's life had taken turns he never could have predicted. The shelter system had cycled them through different locations, each with its own rules, its own temporary sense of safety. Emma had gotten good at adapting, at making friends quickly and saying goodbye just as fast, at doing homework by the light of her small flashlight when the main lights went out too early. The morning everything changed started like any other. Michael was downtown, having gotten up before dawn to stand in line at a temp agency that sometimes had day labor available. Construction work, moving jobs, anything that paid cash and didn't ask too many questions about permanent addresses. Emma was at school, her backpack carefully packed with the few supplies they'd managed to gather, her lunch carefully counted, out in exact change for the hot lunch program. Michael had just finished a morning of loading trucks at a distribution center when his phone rang. It was an unknown number with a Massachusetts area code, but something made him answer it anyway. Hello. Is this Michael Chen?" The voice was familiar, though he couldn't quite place it. "Yes, this is Michael. This is Sarah Martinez. We met at Romano's Deli in Chicago about 3 months ago. You and your daughter Emma shared dinner with me during that snowstorm." Michael stopped walking, people flowing around him on the busy sidewalk. "Sarah? Of course. How are you?" "I'm good. I'm calling because I have a proposition for you if you're interested. I know this might sound crazy, but do you still have that business card I gave you?" Michael pulled out his wallet, finding the worn card tucked behind his driver's license. He'd looked at it dozens of times over the past few months, especially during the worst nights. In the daylight, he could finally read what it said. Sarah Martinez, Executive Chef. Below that, in her handwriting, she'd added a phone number and the words Boston, New England Regional Director. "I have it," he said. "Good. Michael, I need to tell you something about who I am, about why I was sitting at that bus stop that night. I wasn't entirely honest with you." Michael felt his stomach drop. In his experience, when people started conversations that way, it usually meant trouble. "I own restaurants, Michael. A lot of them. 23 locations across New England, all built around the concept of community dining. Places where people can come together over good food, regardless of their circumstances." That night in Chicago, I wasn't just passing through. I was coming back from visiting my cousin, yes, but I was also running away. She paused, and Michael could hear traffic in the background, the sounds of a busy kitchen. I'd just lost a major investment, a deal that would have expanded us nationally. I was sitting at that bus stop because I was having a breakdown, basically. I'd sent my driver away, told my assistant I needed time to think. I was seriously considering walking away from everything I'd built. Michael found a quieter spot on the sidewalk, leaning against a building. "What changed your mind?" "You did, both of you. The way you looked at that food, divided it into 3 portions without hesitation, even though I could tell every bite mattered to you. The way Emma talked about wanting to be a teacher, how she lit up when I mentioned cooking, and the way you listened to my stories about my grandmother's restaurant like they actually mattered. Sarah's voice continued, gaining strength. That night reminded me why I started cooking in the first place, why I wanted to build restaurants that were about more than just profit. You gave me back my purpose when I'd completely lost it. Michael was quiet, processing this information. Around him, the city continued its relentless pace, but he felt suspended in this moment, in this conversation that didn't make complete sense yet. Michael, I want to offer you a job, a real job, with benefits, with housing provided. I need a manager for a new location I'm opening in Burlington, Vermont. It's a town that reminds me a lot of where my grandmother's restaurant was, the kind of place where community matters. The position comes with a 2-bedroom apartment above the restaurant, and there's a great elementary school just 4 blocks away. Michael's hand tightened on the phone. Sarah, I don't have management experience. I know technology, I can work with numbers, but restaurants, I can teach you the restaurant business. What I can't teach is integrity, kindness, the kind of leadership that puts people first. You have those things. I saw it that night. A group of teenagers walked by, laughing loudly, and Michael waited for them to pass before responding. Why? Me, Sarah? You must know people with actual experience. Because I trust you. Because you shared your last meal with a stranger without expecting anything in return. Because your daughter is growing up watching how you treat people, and she's learning that kindness matters more than comfort. Those aren't the kind of references you get from a resume. Michael looked down at the business card again, at the phone number he dialed in his head 100 times during sleepless nights, always stopping before actually calling. What about Emma? Would she... Michael, part of the reason I'm calling you specifically is because of Emma. I told you I used to teach cooking classes to kids, and that was true. But I didn't mention that I've been working with several youth programs in Boston, teaching culinary skills to kids who might not otherwise have those opportunities. Emma showed such curiosity about cooking that night, such genuine interest. If she wanted, she could help me start a youth cooking program. At the Burlington location, the offer was too good, too perfect, too much like the kind of thing that didn't happen to people like him. Michael had spent months learning to manage his hopes, to focus on getting through each day rather than imagining better possibilities. I need to think about this, he said finally, and I need to talk to Emma. Of course, but Michael, don't think too long. Good opportunities don't always wait, and I have a feeling this could be good for both of us. That evening, in their corner of the shelter, Michael sat with Emma as she worked on a social studies project about different states. When she got to Vermont, he casually mentioned the phone call. You remember Sarah from the deli that night? Emma looked up from her colored pencils. The lady with the pretty necklace who knew how to cook? That's her. She called me today. She has a job opportunity in Vermont. Emma's eyes widened. A real job. A real job, managing a restaurant. It would come with a place to live above the restaurant. Would I get my own room? The question was so simple, so basic, but it hit Michael like a wave. Emma had never had her own room, not since they'd lost their apartment. She'd been sleeping on couches, shelter cots, occasionally the back seat of their car, for almost a year. Yes, baby. You'd get your own room. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the same careful consideration she brought to everything else. Would Sarah be there? Sometimes she wants to teach kids how to cook, and she remembered how interested you were that night. I would like that, Emma said. And Daddy, I think you'd be a good manager. You're good at taking care of people. Michael pulled her close, breathing in the scent of the discount shampoo from the shelter, grateful for this small person who somehow maintained such faith in him despite everything they'd been through. "What do you think? Should we try something new?" Emma nodded against his chest. "I think Sarah was right about her necklace bringing good luck. Maybe it just took a while to work." The next morning, Michael called Sarah back. As he dialed, he realized he was shaking slightly, the way he had the first time he'd asked a girl to dance in middle school, the way he had when Emma was born and the doctor had placed her in his arms for the first time. "Sarah, it's Michael. If the offer's still open, Emma and I would love to come to Vermont." The relief in her voice was palpable. "Michael, I'm so glad. I've already started the paperwork, started getting the apartment ready. How soon can you be here? How soon do you need us?" "As soon as possible. We're planning to open in 6 weeks, and I want to give you time to learn everything, to feel comfortable before we open to the public." Michael looked around the shelter at the rows of cots, at the bulletin board covered with job postings and housing lists, at the life they'd been trying to build out of temporary solutions. "Give me a week to get things sorted here, to talk." "To Emma's school about transferring her records." "Perfect. I'll email you all the details, arrange for travel." "And Michael?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for saying yes. I really think this is going to be something special." As Michael hung up the phone, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Excitement about the future. Not just hope, which he'd managed to maintain even during the darkest times, but genuine excitement about possibilities, about building something new. That afternoon, he picked Emma up from school and took her to a small park near the shelter. As she swung on the rusty swing set, he told her about Vermont, about the mountains, about how Sarah had described the town of Burlington as a place where people knew each other's names. "Will we have to say goodbye to everyone here?" she asked. Michael considered this. They'd made friends at the shelter, people who'd become part of their temporary family. "We'll have to say goodbye for now, but that doesn't mean we'll forget them." Emma nodded, pumping her legs to swing higher. "Maybe someday we can invite them to visit us at the restaurant. Maybe we can." "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby? Do you think this is what Mom would have wanted for us?" Michael's breath caught. Emma rarely mentioned her mother, who died when Emma was just 3. But sometimes, in moments like this, she'd ask questions that reminded him she remembered more than he sometimes gave her credit for. "I think," Michael said carefully, "that your mom would want us to be happy, to help other people when we can, and to never stop believing that good things are possible." Emma slowed her swinging, dragging her feet in the dirt. "Then I think this is what she'd want." That night, as they packed their few belongings into 2 small suitcases, Michael found himself thinking about Sarah, about the strange way their lives had intersected that snowy night. He thought about the business card he'd carried for months, about the phone calls he'd almost made during desperate moments, about the faith it had taken for Sarah to call him instead of hiring someone with a proven track record. Most of all, he thought about Emma, about how she'd adapted to each change in their lives with a resilience that constantly amazed him. Tomorrow, they'd start a new chapter, one that felt less like running from something and more like running towards something. As Emma fell asleep beside him, Michael made a promise to himself. He would make this work. Not just for Sarah, not just for himself, but for his daughter, who deserved to have a home again, who deserved to see her father succeed at something meaningful. The bus tickets to Vermont sat on the small shelf beside their cot, tangible proof that sometimes kindness created its own momentum, that sometimes sharing your last meal with a stranger was the first step toward rebuilding your entire life. The bus pulled into Burlington Station just as the afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the windows, casting long shadows across the worn vinyl seats. Emma had spent most of the journey pressed against the window, watching the landscape, Change from urban sprawl to rolling hills to the kind of small-town scenery that looked like it belonged on postcards. Michael had dozed fitfully, Emma's head on his shoulder, still not quite believing they were actually here. Sarah was waiting for them at the station, but she wasn't alone. A man with graying hair and kind eyes stood beside her, wearing what looked like work clothes covered in sawdust. As they gathered their bags, Sarah approached with that same warm smile Michael remembered from the Deli. "Michael, Emma, welcome to Vermont," she said, pulling them both into a quick hug. "I want you to meet Tom Bradley. He's been helping me get the restaurant ready, and he's going to be invaluable as we get everything running." Tom shook Michael's hand with the firm grip of someone who worked with tools for a living. "Sarah's told me a lot about you folks. Glad you decided to take the leap." Emma, still shy from the long trip, stayed close to Michael's side, but managed a small wave. Sarah crouched down to her level. "How was the trip, sweetheart? Ready to see your new home?" The ride through Burlington revealed a town that was bigger than Michael had imagined, but still retained the feel of a place where people knew each other. Tree-lined streets gave way to a downtown area with locally owned shops, a few college students walking with backpacks, and the kind of architecture that spoke of a town with history, but also hope for the future. They turned onto Maple Street, and Sarah pulled up in front of a 3-story brick building with large windows on the ground floor and what looked like apartments above. A sign in the window read, "Opening soon. The community table." "This is it," Sarah said, getting out of the car, home and work all in one convenient location. The restaurant space on the ground floor was still clearly under construction, with drop cloths covering some of the tables and the smell of fresh paint in the air. But Michael could see the vision taking shape. Exposed brick walls, warm lighting, an open kitchen where diners could watch the food being prepared. There were mismatched chairs around tables of various sizes, giving the place a welcoming, lived-in feel rather than the sterile perfection of chain restaurants. "The concept," Sarah explained as they walked through, "is community-style dining. Some tables seat 2, some seat 8, some seat 12. People come in, and sometimes they're seated with strangers. Sometimes they're at a table all to themselves. It depends on what they need that day." Emma wandered over to a reading nook, in one corner, complete with bookshelves and comfortable chairs. "Is this where people wait for tables?" "Actually," Sarah said, "it's for anyone who wants to use it. Students studying, people reading, while their kids play in the play area we're building over there. Anyone who needs a quiet space." Tom showed them the kitchen, which was large and well-equipped, but designed with an unusual openness. "Sarah insisted on the pass-through windows," he explained. "She wants people to see their food being made, wants kids to be able to watch and learn." Michael found himself impressed by the thoughtfulness of every detail. This wasn't just a restaurant. It was clearly designed to be a community gathering place, the kind of place he wished he and Emma had found during their hardest times. "Ready to see upstairs?" Sarah asked. The apartment was on the 2nd floor, accessed by a separate entrance on the side of the building. As Sarah unlocked the door, Michael felt Emma's hand slip into his, both of them holding their breath. The door opened onto a small but bright living room with large windows that looked out onto the street. There was a couch, a coffee table, a small TV, and a dining table with 4 chairs. The kitchen was compact but fully equipped, with a window over the sink that looked out into the restaurant's back garden. 2 bedrooms, Sarah said, leading them down a short hallway. "This one is yours, Michael." The master bedroom was simple, but comfortable, with a double bed, a dresser, and a window that faced the mountains in the distance. Michael set his suitcase down, trying to process the reality of having a real bed again, a real room with a door he could close. "And this one," Sarah said, opening the door across the hall, "is for you, Emma." Emma stepped into the room slowly, as if she was afraid it might disappear if she moved too quickly. It was painted a soft yellow, with a twin bed covered in a cheerful quilt, a desk by the window, and a bookshelf already stocked with books appropriate for her age. "The books are yours to keep," Sarah said softly. "I wasn't sure what you liked to read, so I got a variety." Emma sat on the edge of the bed, running her hands over the quilt. "It's mine, really yours." Michael watched his daughter explore her new room, opening the closet, looking out the window, sitting at the desk. The expression on her face was something he hadn't seen in so long, he'd almost forgotten what it looked like. The particular joy of a child who felt safe and wanted. "Sarah," he said quietly, it's more than I expected, more than we expected." "You haven't seen everything yet," she replied. "Come on." They went back downstairs and through the restaurant to a door that led to the back garden. It was still early in the season, but Michael could see the potential. Raised garden beds, a few tables for outdoor dining, and in one corner, what looked like a small greenhouse. "This is where we'll grow some of our own herbs and vegetables," Sarah explained. "And Emma, if you're interested, this could be part of your cooking education. Understanding where food comes from, how to grow it yourself." Emma perked up at this. "I could help plant things." "Absolutely. In fact, I was hoping you might want to be in charge of the herb garden. Think you could handle that responsibility?" Emma nodded solemnly. "I won't let them die." Sarah laughed. "I have faith in you." They spent the rest of the afternoon with Sarah showing Michael the basics of restaurant operations. The point-of-sale system, the inventory management, the staff schedules. It was overwhelming, but Sarah was patient, breaking everything down into manageable pieces. "The key thing to remember," she said as they stood behind the main counter, "is that this isn't just about the food, though the food is important. It's about creating a space where people feel welcome, where they feel seen and valued." "Like that night at Romano's," Michael said. "Exactly like that night. You and Emma taught me something I'd forgotten. Hospitality isn't about perfect service or fancy presentations. It's about human connection." That evening, after Sarah and Tom had gone home, Michael and Emma ordered pizza and sat on the floor of their new living room, eating off paper plates and talking about the day. "Dad," Emma said through a mouthful of cheese, "do you think we'll be happy here?" Michael looked around the apartment, at the boxes they'd need to unpack, at the windows that would let in morning light, at his daughter sitting cross-legged, on the carpet looking more relaxed than she had in months. "I think," he said carefully, "that we have a really good chance." Emma nodded and took another bite of pizza. "Sarah seems nice. Different from that night at the Deli, but nice." "Different? How? More confident? Like she belongs somewhere now." Michael realized Emma was right. The woman they'd met that snowy night had been lost, displaced, running from something. The Sarah they'd spent the day with was clearly in her element, passionate about her work, comfortable in her own skin. "People can change," he said. "Circumstances can change. Do you think we've changed?" It was a surprisingly deep question from an 8-year-old, but Emma had always been observant, always thinking about things more deeply than most kids her age. "Yes," Michael said. "I think we have. Or maybe we're becoming who we were always, meant to be, but just needed the right place to do it." Emma considered this as she picked pepperoni off her pizza. "I like that idea." That night, Michael tucked Emma into her own bed for the first time in almost a year. She'd arranged the books Sarah had given her on the shelf beside her bed and placed the small stuffed elephant she'd carried through all their moves on her pillow. "Good night, Dad," she said sleepily. "Good night, sweetheart. Sweet dreams." As he closed her door, Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in so long he'd almost forgotten what it was. Peace. Not just the absence of worry, but actual peace. The kind that came from feeling like you were exactly where you were supposed to be. He sat on his own bed, looking out the window at the mountains in the distance, and thought about the chain of events that had brought them here. A shared meal, a business card, a leap of faith. It still felt too good to be true, but the bed beneath him was real, the walls around him were real, and the promise of tomorrow felt more solid than it had in a very long time. The next morning, Michael woke to the sound of activity downstairs. He checked his clock, 6:30 a.m. He got dressed quickly and went downstairs to find the restaurant already bustling with people. Sarah was there, along with Tom and several others he hadn't met yet. "Morning, Michael," Sarah called out. "Ready for your first official day?" "I didn't realize we were starting so early." "Restaurant hours," she explained. "We open for breakfast at 7, so prep starts at 6. Come on, I'll introduce you to everyone." There was Elena, a woman in her 50s who would be the head chef with 20 years of experience in farm-to-table restaurants. Marcus, a young man about Michael's age who would be handling the front-of-house operations. Janet, an older woman, who would be managing the books and administrative tasks, and who looked at Michael with the kind of assessing gaze that suggested she didn't suffer fools gladly. "And this," Sarah said, gesturing to a teenager with bright purple hair who was washing vegetables at the prep station, "is Alex. They're a senior at the local high school and will be working with us part-time, along with being one of our first students in the youth cooking program." Alex looked up and waved, grinning. "You're the new manager. Cool. Sarah says you have a daughter who might be interested in learning to cook." "She is," Michael confirmed. "Very interested." "Awesome. I've been helping Sarah plan the program. We're going to start with basics like knife skills and food safety, then move on to bread making and sauce fundamentals." As the morning progressed, Michael found himself thrown into the deep end of restaurant work. Sarah had him shadow Marcus during the breakfast rush, learning how to seat customers, take orders, coordinate between the kitchen and the dining room. It was chaos, but organized chaos, with everyone knowing their role and working together smoothly. The customers were a mix of locals and college students, people grabbing quick breakfasts before work and others settling in with newspapers and laptops for longer stays. Michael noticed how Marcus greeted many of them by name, how he remembered their usual orders, how he asked about their families or their work. "That's the goal," Sarah explained during a brief lull. "We want people to feel like this is their place, like they belong here." Around 10 o'clock, Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, leading down from their apartment, dressed for school and carrying her backpack. Sarah immediately went over to her. "Morning, sweetie. Ready for your first day at your new school?" Emma nodded, though Michael could see she was nervous. "Dad said you might walk me there since it's on your way to the market." "I'd be honored to walk you to school," Sarah said. "And after school, if you want, you can come down here and Alex can show you around the kitchen." Emma's face brightened at this prospect. "Really? Really? But first, let's get you some breakfast." Elena had prepared a special breakfast. For Emma, scrambled eggs with fresh herbs from their garden to be, toast made from bread she'd baked that morning, and fresh fruit. Emma ate slowly, savoring each bite, her eyes wide as she watched the kitchen staff work around her. After breakfast, Sarah and Emma headed off to school, leaving Michael to continue his training. The lunch rush was different from breakfast, busier but with a different energy. More families, more people taking their time, more conversation flowing between tables. During the afternoon lull, Tom approached Michael. "How's it going so far?" "It's a lot," Michael admitted, "but good, really good." "Sarah's got a gift for this," Tom said, looking around the restaurant. "She sees potential in people, in places, in situations that others might overlook." "Is that what she did with us?" Tom smiled. "Maybe, but I think it goes both ways. You folks came into her life at exactly the right moment, reminded her of why she does this work." That afternoon, When Emma returned from school, she was bubbling with excitement about her new teacher, her new classmates, the art room that had actual easels, the library that was 3 times bigger than her old school's. But what excited her most was the prospect of cooking. Alex spent an hour with her in the kitchen, showing her how to hold a knife properly, how to chop vegetables safely, how to taste ingredients before adding them to a dish. Emma absorbed everything with the focused intensity she brought to subjects that interested her. "She's a natural," Elena commented to Michael as they watched Emma carefully slice mushrooms under Alex's supervision. "Good instincts, careful hands, and most importantly, she's not afraid to try things." As the dinner service began, Michael found himself fully integrated into the restaurant's rhythm. He was seating customers, checking on tables, carrying dishes, between the kitchen and dining room, dealing with everything from special dietary requests to a spilled glass of wine. But what struck him most was how the restaurant felt like Sarah had described, a community gathering place. At one large table, a group of college students was sharing appetizers and studying. At another, an elderly couple was having dinner with what looked like their grandchildren. 2 tables had been pushed together to accommodate a family celebrating a birthday. And in the reading nook, Emma sat with one of Sarah's books, occasionally looking up to watch the kitchen through the pass-through windows, clearly fascinated by the organized chaos of dinner service. "Not bad for a first day," Sarah said, as they closed up that night. The last customers had left around 9, and the staff was cleaning up, preparing for the next morning. Michael helped Marcus put chairs up on tables, while Elena and Alex finished cleaning the kitchen. The work was physical, demanding, but there was something satisfying about it, something that felt more meaningful than the abstract problem-solving of his old tech job. "Sarah," he said as they finished up, "thank you for all of this, for taking a chance on us." She paused in her wiping down of the counter. "Michael, I didn't take a chance on you. I recognized something in you, something I needed for this place to succeed." "Which was what?" "You understand what it means to need community, to need a place where you belong. You can't teach that kind of empathy, that kind of understanding. People either have it or they don't." As they headed upstairs, Emma already asleep on the couch in the reading nook, Michael reflected on the day. It had been intense, overwhelming at times, but also energizing in a way he hadn't expected. He felt useful, needed, part of something bigger than himself. "Dad," Emma murmured as he carried her up to her room, "I like it here." "Me too, baby. Me too." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. Michael worked mornings and evenings at the restaurant, with afternoons free to spend with Emma when she got home from school. He learned to manage staff schedules, handle inventory orders, deal with vendors and suppliers. More importantly, he learned to read the ebb and flow of the restaurant, to anticipate busy periods, to manage the delicate balance between efficiency and hospitality. Emma threw herself into both school and her after-school time in the kitchen. She learned to make bread, to prepare salads, to understand the basics of seasoning and flavoring. Alex became like an older sibling to her, patient with her questions, encouraging when she made mistakes. "She's got real talent," Elena told Michael one evening, as they watched Emma carefully plate a dish she'd prepared under supervision. Not just for cooking, but for understanding how food brings people together. Sarah visited regularly, sometimes for business, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to work side by side with Elena in the kitchen. Michael began to understand that her restaurant empire wasn't built on rigid corporate structures, but on relationships, on finding people who shared her vision and trusting them to bring it to life. One evening, about 3 weeks after they'd arrived, Sarah suggested that Michael might want to start developing some signature dishes for the restaurant, things that would set them apart from other establishments in the area. "But I'm not a chef," he protested. "You don't have to be a chef to understand what makes food meaningful," she replied. "Think about the best meals you've ever had. What made them special?" Michael thought about this as he walked home that night. The best meals he could remember weren't necessarily the most expensive or elaborate. They were the ones connected to memories, to relationships, to moments that mattered. His mother's Sunday dinners when he was a child. The first meal he'd cooked for Emma's mother, that night at Romano's Deli, sharing soup and sandwiches with a stranger who became so much more. That weekend, Sarah suggested they take a drive up into the mountains, all three of them, to visit some of the local farms that supplied the restaurant. Emma was excited about seeing where their vegetables came from, and Michael was curious about the business relationships Sarah had built with local producers. The drive wound through hills covered with farms, some large and commercial, others small and clearly family-owned. They stopped at a dairy farm where the owner, a woman named Beth, showed Emma how to milk a cow and explained how the milk became the cheese they used in the restaurant. "Sarah was one of our first customers," Beth told Michael, as they watched Emma pet a calf in the barn. "Back when we were just starting out, trying to find markets for our products. She didn't just buy from us, she helped us understand what restaurants needed, how to improve our products." They visited an organic vegetable farm, a maple syrup producer, and a small bakery that supplied their bread. At each stop, Michael saw the same pattern. Sarah hadn't just found suppliers, she'd built relationships, helped small businesses grow, created a network of mutual support. "This is what I mean about community," she explained as they drove back toward Burlington. "It's not just about the restaurant. It's about being part of an ecosystem, supporting each other, growing together." That evening, inspired by the day's visits, Michael found himself in the kitchen with Elena and Emma, experimenting with a soup recipe that combined local ingredients in new ways. It started with the minestrone base they served regularly, but they added roasted root vegetables from the farm they'd visited, cheese from Beth's dairy, herbs from their own garden. The result was something entirely new, but somehow familiar, comforting but sophisticated. Elena tasted it and raised her eyebrows. "This is really good, Michael. Really, really good." "It needs a name," Emma said, thinking seriously. "What about community harvest soup?" "Perfect," Michael said, and he meant it. Word spread quickly through the restaurant's regular customers about the new soup. People started coming in specifically to try it, and many asked if it would be a permanent addition to the menu. Sarah tried it on her next visit and immediately declared it one of the restaurant's signature dishes. "See," she said to Michael, "you do have the instincts for this. You created something that tells a story, that connects people to this place and to each other." As spring moved toward summer, the restaurant found its rhythm. The morning regulars, the lunch crowd, the dinner families, the late-night students. Emma's cooking skills improved dramatically under Alex and Elena's tutelage, and she began helping with some of the prep work for simpler dishes. Michael realized one morning, as he unlocked the restaurant and breathed in the scent of Elena's fresh bread baking, that he hadn't thought about their old life in days. Not because he was forgetting it, but because this new life felt so complete, so right, that the past seemed like something that had happened to different people. "Dad," Emma said one evening as they sat in their living room both reading, "do you think we'll stay here forever?" Michael looked up from his book, surprised by the question. "Do you want to stay here forever?" Emma considered this seriously. "I like it here. I like my school. I like cooking with Alex and Elena. I like that people know our names at the grocery store. Those are all good reasons to stay somewhere. But I think," she continued thoughtfully, "that maybe forever is too long to think about. Maybe we should just think about staying as long as we're happy and as long as we're helping." Michael set down his book and looked at his daughter, amazed once again by her wisdom. "You're right. That's exactly how we should think about it. Dad? Yeah? I think Mom would like it here. I think she'd like Sarah, and she'd like that we're helping make a place where people feel welcome. Michael's throat tightened. I think you're absolutely right. That night, as Michael lay in bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the town settling into sleep, he thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that snowy night, sharing a meal with a stranger, to this moment, tucked into their own beds in their own apartment above a restaurant that felt more like home than any place they'd lived. He thought about Sarah, how she'd transformed her own crisis into an opportunity to help others, how she'd built something that was about more than business success. He thought about Emma, growing and learning and finding her own passion, becoming part of a community that valued her contributions. And he thought about himself, how he'd gone from feeling like a failure, like someone who couldn't provide for his daughter, to feeling like he had something valuable to offer, something that mattered. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new customers, new opportunities to create the kind of experiences that made people feel seen and valued. But tonight, Michael fell asleep feeling grateful for the strange way life could surprise you, for the kindness of strangers who became family, for the possibility of building something meaningful from the simplest acts of human connection. Outside, his window, the mountains stood silhouetted against the starry sky, and the community table sat quiet and ready for another day of bringing people together, one meal at a time. The autumn leaves were beginning to turn when Michael first noticed the strain in Sarah's voice during their weekly phone calls. The community table had been running successfully for 5 months now, exceeding every expectation Sarah had set for their first year. The lunch crowds were steady, dinner reservations were booked solid on weekends, and the youth cooking program had a waiting list of eager students. But something had shifted in Sarah's demeanor over the past few weeks, a tension that she tried to hide behind her usual enthusiasm. Michael was reviewing inventory in the restaurant's small office when Sarah arrived for one of her regular visits, appearing earlier than usual and looking uncharacteristically disheveled. Her normally polished appearance was replaced by dark circles under her eyes and a coffee-stained sweater that suggested she'd been working through the night. "Sarah, you look exhausted," Michael said, standing up from the desk where receipts and order forms were spread across every available surface. "I'm fine," she replied, but her voice lacked its usual conviction, just dealing with some corporate restructuring issues, nothing that affects Burlington directly. Michael had learned to read between the lines of Sarah's careful explanations. In the months they'd worked together, he'd discovered that her restaurant empire was built on a complex network of partnerships, investments, and franchise agreements that required constant attention and delicate balancing. "When's the last time you had a real meal?" he asked, noting how she kept fidgeting with her phone, checking messages every few seconds. "I grabbed something at the airport." "That wasn't what I asked." Elena emerged from the kitchen at that moment, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sarah, you're just in time. I've been experimenting with that butternut squash soup recipe you suggested, and I need a professional opinion." Sarah's phone buzzed again, and Michael watched her struggle with whether to answer it or accept Elena's invitation. Finally, she put the phone face down on the counter and followed Elena into the kitchen. Over the next hour, as the lunch service began, Michael observed Sarah trying to lose herself in the familiar rhythm of the restaurant. She helped Alex prepare salads, checked on tables with customers, and spent time in the reading nook with Emma, who had come downstairs after school to work on her homework. But the phone kept buzzing, and each time it did, that worried expression would flicker across her face. During a brief lull between lunch and dinner, Sarah finally explained what was happening. A major investor in her restaurant group had suddenly pulled out, creating a domino effect that threatened several locations. 2 restaurants in Boston were at risk of closing, and a planned expansion into New Hampshire had been cancelled. Worse, there were questions about whether some of the existing locations would be able to maintain their current staffing levels. "I've been meeting with lawyers and accountants for 2 weeks straight," she said, slumping in one of the dining room chairs. "Trying to restructure debt, find new investors, figure out how to keep everything afloat without compromising what we've built." Michael poured her a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. "What does this mean for Burlington?" "Nothing, I hope. You're profitable, you're sustainable, you're exactly what I envisioned when I started this whole venture. But if I have to liquidate assets to save the other locations..." She didn't finish the sentence, but Michael understood. The community table could become collateral damage in a larger financial crisis. "Is there anything we can do to help?" Emma asked, approaching their table with her backpack slung over one shoulder. She'd clearly overheard enough of the conversation to understand that Sarah was in some kind of trouble. Sarah managed a smile for Emma. "Sweet of you to offer, honey, but this is grown-up business stuff, very boring." "Maybe," Emma said thoughtfully, "but boring stuff affects people. If your restaurants close, that means people lose their jobs, right? And places for families to eat together." Michael was continuously amazed by his daughter's ability to cut through complexity and identify what really mattered. Sarah looked at Emma for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right. It's not just about money or business. It's about people and communities." That evening, after the dinner service had ended and the last customers had left, Michael found himself staying late to help with closing procedures. Sarah was still there, laptop open at a corner table surrounded by financial documents and what looked like architectural plans. "You don't have to stay," she said, without looking up from her screen. "I know Emma's waiting for you upstairs." "She's working on a science project with Alex in the kitchen," Michael replied. "Something about fermentation that requires precise timing, apparently." Sarah laughed softly. "Those two have been plotting that experiment for weeks. I think Alex is more excited about it than Emma is." Michael began wiping down tables, working his way across the dining room towards Sarah's impromptu office. "You know, when I was in tech, we had a saying, 'Sometimes you have to kill your darlings to save the whole project.' Meaning, maybe you're trying to save everything when the smart move is to focus on saving what matters most." Sarah looked up from her laptop. "These aren't just investments, Michael. Each restaurant represents someone's livelihood, someone's community gathering place. The one in Brookline has been hosting a weekly support group for cancer patients. The Cambridge location partners with 3 local schools for their nutrition education programs. I understand that. But if trying to save them all means losing everything..." Sarah closed her laptop with a sharp snap. "You don't understand, actually. You can't just reduce this to numbers on a spreadsheet." The words hung between them, sharper than Sarah had probably intended. Michael continued wiping down tables, giving her space to realize how that had sounded. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "That was unfair. You've seen firsthand how much these places mean to people. Sarah, I'm not suggesting you don't care. I'm suggesting that maybe caring means making hard choices now to prevent worse outcomes later." Over the following days, Michael watched Sarah wrestle with decisions that would affect hundreds of employees and thousands of regular customers across New England. She held video conferences with managers from other locations, spent hours on calls with investors and creditors, and somehow still managed to maintain her presence at the community table. During this time, something unexpected happened. Word spread through Burlington's tight-knit community that Sarah was facing difficulties with her restaurant group. Without being asked, customers began showing up, not just for meals, but to offer support. Mrs. Henderson, who came in for lunch every Tuesday, brought her financial advisor's son to review Sarah's business plan. The college students who studied in the reading nook organized a crowdfunding campaign. Even Betty from the dairy farm showed up with her accountant husband to discuss creative ways to extend payment terms for suppliers. "This is what community means," Elena said to Michael as they watched a group of local business owners sitting around the large community table, brainstorming ways to help Sarah navigate the crisis. When someone who's given so much to others needs help, people step up. Emma had appointed herself Sarah's unofficial assistant during this period, bringing her snacks when she forgot to eat, making sure she had fresh coffee, and generally providing the kind of quiet support that children excel at. One evening, Michael found them sitting together in the reading nook, Emma coloring while Sarah worked on her laptop. "You know what my dad says about problems?" Emma said, not looking up from her drawing of what appeared to be a restaurant with butterfly wings. "What's that?" "He says every problem is like a puzzle, and you just have to find the right way to put the pieces together. Sometimes you have to take apart the whole puzzle and start over." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile Michael had seen from her in weeks. "Your dad is a smart man." "Yeah. And he says when you're stuck on a puzzle, sometimes you need fresh eyes, someone who hasn't been staring at the same pieces for too long." That weekend, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She announced that she was taking a temporary step back from the day-to-day management of the other restaurants to focus entirely on finding a sustainable solution for the whole enterprise. "I've been trying to manage a crisis while running from location to location, putting out fires without addressing the underlying structural problems," she explained to Michael and the staff during a team meeting. "I need to be strategic, not reactive." She moved into the small apartment above the bakery next door, transforming it into a temporary headquarters where she could work without the constant interruptions that came with trying to manage a crisis from Boston. This decision allowed her to be more present at the community table while still addressing the larger corporate issues. The change in Sarah was immediate and noticeable. Without the stress of constant travel and trying to be everywhere at once, she seemed more like the person Michael remembered from their early conversations, focused but calm, decisive but thoughtful. One afternoon, while Emma was at school and the restaurant was in its quiet mid-afternoon lull, Sarah approached Michael with a proposal that caught him completely off guard. "I want you to consider becoming a partner in the community table," she said without preamble. Michael looked up from the staff schedule he was preparing. "What?" "I've been thinking about sustainable business models, about how to ensure places like this can survive economic downturns and investor panics. The community table works because it's embedded in its community, because the people who run it understand and care about the people who come here." Sarah pulled out a folder thick with documents. "I want to restructure this location as a cooperative. You, Elena, Marcus, even Alex when they graduate, anyone who's invested in making this place succeed. You'd own shares based on your contribution and commitment." Michael stared at the folder, not quite processing what she was offering. "Sarah, I don't have money to invest in a business. You've invested something more valuable than money. You've invested yourself, your integrity, your vision of what this place could be. That sweat equity, that emotional investment, that's worth more than cash to me." The proposal was complex, involving profit-sharing, decision-making responsibilities, and a gradual transition of ownership over time. Sarah would maintain a stake in the business and continue to provide oversight and support, but the day-to-day operations would be entirely controlled by the local partners. "Why?" Michael asked. "Finally, why give up ownership of something that's clearly your vision, your success?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the mountains in the distance. "Because that night we shared dinner at Romano's, you taught me something about ownership that I'd forgotten. You owned that moment, that act of generosity. Not because you paid for the meal, but because you chose to share it. Ownership isn't just about legal documents and financial stakes. It's about responsibility, care, commitment. She turned back to him. I want the community table to be owned by people who will show up on the hardest days, who understand that success isn't just measured in profits, but in the lives touched, the community built, the sustainability maintained. Over the next several weeks, as Sarah worked out the details of her proposal, the larger crisis with her restaurant empire began to resolve in unexpected ways. 3 locations were indeed closed, but the employees were relocated to other restaurants within the group. 2 new investors emerged, both with backgrounds in community development rather than pure profit maximization. The restructuring was painful, but ultimately led to a more stable and sustainable business model for the remaining locations. Throughout this period, Michael found himself thinking deeply about Sarah's partnership proposal. It represented everything he had never dared to hope for: stability, ownership, the chance to build something meaningful with his own hands. But it also represented responsibility, risk, the possibility of failure that would affect not just him and Emma, but everyone who worked at the restaurant. Emma, predictably, had strong opinions about the decision when Michael finally discussed it with her. "Dad, it means we get to stay forever if we want to," she said, looking up from the bread she was kneading under Alex's supervision. "It means this is really our home. But it also means a lot of responsibility, a lot of work, a lot of risk." Emma considered this seriously. "Everything good has risk, right? Like when you taught me to ride a bike. I could have fallen and gotten hurt, but I also could have learned to fly." "And did you learn to fly?" "Every time I ride down a big hill," she grinned, "I fly a little bit." The decision ultimately came down to a moment of clarity that arrived, as such moments often do, during an ordinary Tuesday evening service. Michael was moving through the dining room, checking on tables, when he overheard a conversation between 2 customers he recognized as regulars. "This place saved my marriage," the woman was saying to her companion. "When Paul lost his job and we were fighting all the time, we started coming here once a week. Something about the atmosphere, the way people treat each other here, it reminded us what we were fighting for." Her companion nodded. "I know what you mean. After my mom died, I couldn't stand being alone in my apartment. I started coming here just to be around people, to feel like I belonged somewhere. The staff never made me feel like I was taking up space." Michael continued his rounds, but the conversation stayed with him. This was why the community table mattered, why it deserved to be owned by people who understood that its success couldn't be measured solely in financial terms. That night, after closing, Michael found Sarah in the kitchen, reviewing recipes with Elena for the following day's specials. "I'll do it," he said simply. "I want to be a partner." Sarah smiled, not with surprise, but with satisfaction, as if she'd been waiting for him to reach this conclusion on his own terms. "There's one condition," Michael continued. "Emma gets to be part of this too. Not legally, obviously, she's 8 years old, but she has a voice in how we run things, especially anything that affects the youth program or the community aspects." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Sarah replied. "She's already been my best advisor on making this place truly welcoming to families." The paperwork took several more weeks to finalize, involving lawyers and accountants and documents that made Michael's head spin. But on a crisp November morning, he signed the papers that made him a part owner of the community table. The celebration was quintessentially community table, not a fancy party, but a special dinner service where the entire extended restaurant, family gathered, local suppliers, regular customers, staff from other restaurants in Sarah's group, even some of the teenagers from the cooking program. Emma, wearing an apron Alex had made for her with junior partner embroidered on the front, helped serve the meal. Sarah gave a short speech about the evolution of ownership and community, about how the best investments were in people and relationships rather than just buildings and equipment. "When I first envisioned the community table," she said, looking around the room at the assembled faces, "I thought I knew what success would look like. Profitable margins, positive reviews, steady growth. But what I learned is that real success is measured in moments like this, in connections made, in people feeling like they belong." As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Emma approached Michael with a serious expression. "Dad, does this mean we're really staying? Like, this is really our home now?" Michael knelt down to her level, looking into her eyes that held such hope and trust. "Yes, sweetheart, this is really our home now." Emma nodded solemnly, then broke into a grin. "Good, because I was getting tired of always being ready to leave." That night, as Michael locked up the restaurant for the first time as a partial owner, he felt a satisfaction he'd never experienced in his previous career. This wasn't just a job anymore, or even just a livelihood. This was a calling, a commitment, a way of being in the world that aligned with his deepest values. The snow began falling again that night, just as it had on that evening so many months ago when he and Emma had shared their last $5 with a stranger at a bus stop. But this time, watching it from the window of his own apartment above, his own restaurant, Michael didn't feel the old anxiety about what tomorrow might bring. Instead, he felt grateful for the strange, circuitous path that had led them here, for the kindness of strangers that had become the foundation of a new life, for the daughter who had never lost faith that things could get better. The community table was more than just a restaurant now. It was a testament to the idea that sometimes the best businesses are the ones that prioritize human connection over pure profit. That true success comes from building something that enriches not just the owners, but everyone who walks through the door. As Michael prepared for bed that night, he found a note that Emma had slipped under his door. In her careful handwriting, it simply said, "Thank you for sharing our soup with Sarah. It made everything possible." He smiled, tucked the note into his wallet next to the old business card that had started it all, and fell asleep to the sound of the wind in the trees outside his window, no longer a sound of uncertainty, but of change that brought possibility. The first snowfall of winter brought with it an unexpected visitor. Michael was preparing for the morning service, reviewing invoices in the small office, when Elena knocked on the doorframe, looking puzzled. "There's a woman outside asking for Sarah," she said. "She's been standing in the snow for 20 minutes, but she won't come in. Says she needs to speak with the owner personally." Michael looked through the window and saw a figure huddled against the cold, definitely not dressed for Vermont weather. Something about her posture seemed familiar, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. He grabbed his coat and stepped outside. The woman looked up as he approached, and Michael's breath caught. She was probably in her 40s, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that held a familiar kind of determination mixed with uncertainty. "Are you Sarah Martinez?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight accent he recognized as similar to Sarah's. "No, I'm Michael Chen, the manager here. Sarah isn't in yet, but she'll be here within the hour. Can I help you with something? You must be freezing." The woman hesitated, glancing toward the restaurant's warm interior. "I'm Rosa Martinez, Sarah's cousin, from Chicago." The name clicked immediately in Michael's memory. This was the cousin Sarah had been visiting that snowy night when they'd first met, the one who'd helped her get back on her feet after her divorce. "Rosa, please come inside. Sarah talks about you often. Let me get you some coffee and something warm to eat." Rosa followed him reluctantly into the restaurant, her eyes taking in every detail with the kind of assessment that reminded Michael of Sarah's first visit. She accepted a cup of coffee but declined food, sitting at a corner table with her back to the wall, clearly uncomfortable. "Is Sarah in some kind of trouble?" Michael asked gently. "Is that why you're here?" Rosa's laugh was bitter. "I'm the one in trouble. Again. And I swore I'd never ask her for help again after the last time." Before Michael could respond, the front door opened and Sarah entered, shaking snow from her coat. Her face went through a rapid succession of emotions when she saw Rosa: surprise, concern, and something that looked like resignation. "Rosa, what are you doing here? Is everything okay?" Sarah rushed to the table, sliding into the seat across from her cousin. "Nothing's okay," Rosa said quietly, "but I didn't know where else to go." Over the next hour, as the restaurant began to fill with breakfast customers, Rosa told her story. Her ex-husband had found her, despite the restraining order. He'd shown up at her workplace, causing a scene that got her fired. The small apartment Sarah had helped her secure was no longer safe, and she'd used the last of her savings to take a bus to Vermont, hoping Sarah could help her disappear again. "I can't keep running," Rosa said, tears streaming down her face. "I can't keep starting over every few months. I'm exhausted, Sarah. I'm so tired of being afraid." Sarah reached across the table and took her cousin's hands. "You don't have to run anymore. You can stay here." "I don't have any skills that transfer to restaurant work," Rosa protested. "I was a social worker before everything fell apart." Michael, who had been listening while managing the breakfast service, paused in his work. "Actually, we've been talking about expanding our community outreach programs. Sarah's been wanting to offer more support services alongside the food program." Sarah looked at him sharply, clearly not having expected him to speak up. But Michael continued, the idea forming as he talked. "We get a lot of people in here who need more than just a meal. Single parents trying to make ends meet, elderly folks who are isolated, people dealing with various crises. Having someone with social work training could be invaluable." "You can't just create a job for me," Rosa said, shaking her head. "I won't be charity." "It wouldn't be charity," Sarah said slowly, clearly thinking through the possibilities. "Michael's right. We've been discussing how to expand our community impact beyond just food service, and with the partnership structure we're implementing, new roles, new revenue streams, new ways of serving people all make sense." It was Elena who provided the crucial perspective, approaching their table during a lull in the breakfast rush. "I've been working in restaurants for 20 years, she said, introducing herself to Rosa. "And I can tell you, the best restaurants aren't just about food. They're about creating a space where people feel safe, valued, cared for. If you understand how to help people navigate difficult situations, how to connect them with resources, how to listen without judgment, you already have the most important skills for this work." Rosa stayed for the rest of the day, observing how the restaurant operated, talking with different staff members, gradually relaxing as she realized she wasn't being judged or rushed into any decisions. Emma bonded with her immediately after school, especially when Rosa mentioned that she'd worked with children and families in her previous job. "Do you know how to help kids whose parents are going through hard times?" Emma asked, with the directness that still sometimes caught Michael off guard. "That was a big part of my job," Rosa replied gently. "Helping families stay together, helping kids feel safe when adults were dealing with difficult things, like when parents lose their jobs and have to live in shelters." "Yes, exactly like that." Emma nodded seriously. "That's important work. Sarah said you were really good at it." That evening, after the restaurant closed, the four adults sat around the large community table discussing practical details. Rosa would need housing, at least temporarily. She'd need to be licensed to practice social work in Vermont. They'd need to figure out how to structure her role within the restaurant. "The apartment upstairs is too small for all of us," Michael said, but there are a few larger rentals available nearby. Sarah mentioned wanting to create some staff housing options anyway. I've been looking at a house about 6 blocks from here, Sarah added. 3 bedrooms, good kitchen, big living room. I was thinking about it for visiting staff or as temporary housing for people in transition. This might be the perfect opportunity to test that concept. You're moving too fast, Rosa protested. You don't even know if I can do this kind of work, if I can adapt to a completely different field. You spent 2 years helping me figure out how to rebuild my life, Sarah reminded her. You know how to meet people where they are, how to see potential when someone can't see it themselves, how to provide support without taking away dignity. That's exactly what we need here. Over the following weeks, Rosa settled into Burlington and began developing what would become the Community Table's social services program. She started small, simply by being available during mealtimes to listen to customers who wanted to talk, to provide information about local resources, to help people navigate systems that felt overwhelming. The program grew organically, shaped by the actual needs of the community rather than any predetermined framework. Rosa established relationships with local agencies, created a referral network, and began hosting weekly groups that combined shared meals with peer support. The genius of doing this in a restaurant setting, she explained to Michael one afternoon as they watched one of her groups, is that it doesn't feel institutional. People don't have to admit they need help to walk in here. They can come for lunch and end up getting connected to job training programs, housing assistance, mental health resources, whatever they need. Emma became an unofficial assistant to Rosa, helping with children's groups, organizing art supplies for therapy sessions, and generally providing the kind of innocent wisdom that children excel at in difficult situations. One of Rosa's first major successes involved a family that had been coming to the restaurant regularly, but always seemed on edge, nervous. Through careful conversations over several weeks, Rosa learned that they were undocumented immigrants, afraid to access services they desperately needed. The 12-year-old daughter was translating everything for her parents, handling all the family's interactions with schools, healthcare providers, government agencies, Rosa explained to Sarah and Michael. That's way too much responsibility for a child, and it was affecting the whole family's ability to integrate into the community. Rosa connected them with legal aid services, English language classes, and advocacy organizations. More importantly, she created a support group for other immigrant families facing similar challenges, hosted at the restaurant during off-peak hours. Creating community is as important as providing individual services, Rosa told a local newspaper reporter who was writing about the program. When people realize they're not alone, when they can support each other, that's when real change happens. The restaurant's community role continued to expand in unexpected ways. A group of senior citizens who ate lunch together several times a week asked if they could stay longer in the afternoons to work on a memoir project. The Reading Nook became an informal homework help center where high school students tutored younger kids in exchange for free meals. A local lawyer began offering free legal clinics on Tuesday mornings. We're not becoming a social service agency, Sarah clarified during a staff meeting. We're remaining a restaurant that recognizes the full spectrum of human needs. People need food, but they also need connection, support, hope, practical assistance. The financial model proved more sustainable than anyone had expected. The expansion in services brought new customers, increased loyalty among existing customers, and attracted grants from foundations interested in innovative approaches to community development. It's like we've discovered that treating people as whole human beings is actually good business, Michael remarked to Emma one evening as they reviewed the month's numbers. Maybe because whole human beings are better customers than just stomachs, Emma replied, not looking up from her homework. The success of the Burlington location's integrated approach began attracting attention from other restaurants in Sarah's network and from community organizations in other parts of Vermont and beyond. Sarah found herself consulting on how to replicate the model, how to train restaurant staff to recognize and respond to social needs, how to build partnerships with local service providers. "We're not trying to revolutionize anything," she told a gathering of restaurant owners and social service professionals. "We're just recognizing that restaurants have always been community gathering places, and sometimes community gathering places need to offer more than just food." One particularly cold February evening, a young couple came in with their toddler, clearly out of place in their business clothes and looking uncomfortable. They ordered the least expensive items on the menu and ate slowly, making the food last. Emma, who was helping with light tasks after finishing her homework, noticed them immediately. "Dad," she whispered to Michael, "those people at table 7 look like they need help, but they're trying not to look like they need help." Michael glanced over and saw what Emma had noticed: designer clothes that were slightly too big, suggesting weight loss from stress, expensive shoes that were scuffed and worn, a leather briefcase that looked out of place with their anxious demeanor. Rosa approached their table casually, refilling their water glasses. "Everything tasting good tonight?" "Yes, wonderful, thank you," the woman replied, but her husband looked away, clearly embarrassed. "We have some families who come in with little ones around that age," Rosa continued conversationally. "There's a playgroup that meets here Tuesday mornings, very informal, just parents and kids, coffee and conversation. You're welcome to join us if you're interested." The couple exchanged a look, and the woman's composure cracked slightly. "That sounds nice. We're new to the area and haven't met many people yet." After they left, Rosa explained what she'd observed to Michael and Sarah. Recent job loss, probably executive level, moved here for a position that fell through or got eliminated. Trying to maintain appearances while figuring out next steps. Classic scenario. "How do you know all that?" Michael asked. "Body language, clothes, the way they interacted with the menu prices, the tension between them. Plus," the woman mentioned, "being new to the area, and they have that particular kind of shell-shocked look that comes with professional disappointment." The couple did return for the playgroup, and gradually, through Rosa's patient outreach, revealed their situation. They'd moved to Vermont for what was supposed to be the husband's dream job, only to have the startup company fold within 6 weeks. Their savings were nearly gone, they were behind on rent, and both were struggling with the shame of going from financial success to financial crisis so quickly. "We keep thinking we shouldn't be here," the woman Jennifer admitted during one of Rosa's support groups. "We have advanced degrees, we had good jobs, we owned a house. We're not the kind of people who need charity." "First," Rosa replied gently, "this isn't charity, this is community. And second, financial crisis doesn't discriminate based on education or background. What matters is what we do now, how we support each other, how we move forward." Rosa helped them connect with temporary employment agencies, professional networking groups, and financial counseling services. But more importantly, she helped them see that accepting help wasn't a failure of character, but a recognition of human interdependence. 6 months later, Jennifer started working part-time at the community table while continuing to look for work in her field. Her husband found consulting work that gradually turned into a full-time position with a local non-profit. They became regular volunteers with Rosa's programs, particularly enjoying mentoring other professional families navigating financial setbacks. "What we learned," Jennifer told a group of new program participants, "is that community isn't just about geography, it's about showing up for each other, especially when things are hard. This place taught us how to receive help gracefully and how to give help meaningfully. As winter turned to spring, Michael found himself reflecting on how dramatically their lives had changed since that snowy night in Chicago. Emma was thriving in school, excelling in her cooking classes with Alex, and had become an integral part of the restaurant's daily operations. Rosa had created something entirely new and necessary, bridging the gap between food service and social service in ways that felt natural and sustainable. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Emma asked him one evening as they prepared for bed. "Which part of it?" Michael replied. "The tech job, the bigger apartment, the way things were before Mom died." Michael considered this carefully. "I miss your mother every day, but the rest of it? No, I don't think I do. That life was comfortable in some ways, but it wasn't really connected to anything larger than ourselves." "Do you think this is better?" "I think this is more real, more honest about what life actually is, how much we need each other." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Alex says that cooking is like that too. You can't make good food without understanding how different ingredients work together, how they depend on each other to create something neither could make alone. Alex is pretty wise for someone so young." "Yeah, and they said they learned it from Elena, who learned it from working in restaurants for 20 years, who learned it from their grandmother, who came here from Italy with nothing but recipes and determination." Michael smiled at this generational chain of wisdom, at how knowledge and values passed from person to person through shared work, shared meals, shared stories. That night, as Michael fell asleep to the familiar sounds of the town settling into quiet, he felt grateful for the unexpected path that had brought them here, for the stranger who had become family, for the daughter who continued to amaze him with her insight and resilience. The community table had become more than any of them had imagined when Sarah first offered him the job. It was a place where food and service and community support were seamlessly woven together, where people could find not just sustenance, but connection, hope, and practical help for life's challenges. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new stories, new opportunities to practice the kind of hospitality that recognized each person's full humanity. And Michael looked forward to it all, knowing that he was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly the work he was meant to do, with exactly the people he was meant to build this life alongside. 5 years had passed since that transformative winter when Rosa arrived seeking refuge, forever changing the trajectory of the community table. What began as a small restaurant with a social conscience had evolved into something unprecedented, a model that was being studied by university students, replicated by other businesses, and written about in journals spanning everything from hospitality management to social work. The morning sun filtered through the expanded windows of what was now known locally as simply the table, though its official name remained the community table. Michael stood in the main dining room, which had grown to encompass the entire ground floor of the building and half of the space next door. Where once there had been 50 seats, there were now nearly 200, arranged in configurations that seemed to shift organically throughout the day to accommodate different needs. Emma, now 13 and taller than her father had been at her age, emerged from the kitchen wearing the chef's whites that had become her daily uniform during summer break. She carried a tray of pastries she'd made for the morning service, her movements confident and practiced in a way that spoke of years spent learning alongside Elena and Alex, who had graduated from high school and was now the sous chef. "The lavender honey scones turned out perfectly," she announced, setting the tray on the service counter. "Mrs. Patterson specifically asked if we'd have them today for her book club meeting." Michael smiled, watching his daughter work with the same pride he felt every morning. Emma had grown into her role at the restaurant as naturally as she'd grown into her teenage years, developing not just culinary skills, but an intuitive understanding of hospitality that rivaled Sarah's own. Rosa appeared from the back office, no longer the frightened woman who had arrived in the snow 5 years ago, but someone who carried herself with quiet authority and deep contentment. She wore a simple blazer over jeans, her hair silvered at the temples, her expression serene in a way that spoke of work that aligned perfectly with her purpose. "The Food Insecurity Task Force is meeting at 10, she told Michael, checking her tablet. "And we have 3 families coming in this afternoon for the financial counseling sessions. Plus, the cooking therapy group starts the new 6-week program today." The transformation of Rosa's role had been gradual but profound. What had started as informal conversations over meals had grown into a comprehensive wellness program that addressed the interconnected nature of food, mental health, financial stability, and community connection. The restaurant now employed 4 social workers, 2 financial counselors, a nutritionist, and 3 therapists, all working in an integrated model that treated each person who walked through the door as a complete human being with complex needs. Sarah entered through the main door, shaking rain from her umbrella and greeting several of the early morning regulars by name. At 62, she moved with the same energy that had characterized her younger years, though there was a settledness about her now. A deep satisfaction that came from seeing a vision not just realized, but exceeded. "The delegation from Portland is arriving at 3, she announced to the group. "They're particularly interested in how we've managed to maintain profitability while expanding the social services component." This was a question they fielded regularly now. The community table had become a case study in sustainable business practices that prioritized community benefit alongside financial success. The restaurant remained profitable through a combination of traditional food service, catering contracts with local businesses, grant funding for the social services component, and what they called conscious pricing, a model that allowed customers to pay what they could while maintaining overall financial stability. The morning rush began, as it always did, with a mix of workers grabbing coffee and pastries, families settling in for leisurely breakfasts, and individuals who came as much for the atmosphere as for the food. Michael moved through the dining room with practiced ease, stopping to chat with regulars, checking on new faces, coordinating with the staff to ensure everything flowed smoothly. At one of the large communal tables, a group of retirees were deep in discussion about a community garden project they were launching in partnership with the restaurant. At another, a young mother worked on her laptop while her toddler played in the designated children's area, occasionally bringing construction, paper artwork to show the staff. In the reading nook, which had expanded into what was now called the Learning Commons, several high school students tutored younger children in mathematics, part of an after-school program that had grown to serve nearly 100 kids throughout the week. The walls displayed artwork created in Rosa's art therapy groups, photographs from community events, and a timeline showing the restaurant's evolution over the years. "Dad, can you check on table 12? Emma asked, approaching with a concerned expression. "The woman there seems upset, and I wasn't sure if I should say something or get Rosa." Michael glanced toward the indicated table, where a woman in her 30s sat alone, staring at her untouched breakfast, while tears rolled down her cheeks. He recognized the signs immediately, the kind of public breakdown that came when private struggles became too heavy to carry alone. He approached the table carefully, his voice gentle. "Is everything okay? Can I get you anything?" The woman looked up, startled, then embarrassed to be caught crying. "I'm sorry, I don't usually. I should probably leave." "You don't need to leave," Michael said, settling into the chair across from her. "This is a safe space to have whatever feelings you're having. Would you like to talk, or would you prefer I just sit here for a minute?" "I don't know why I came here," she said, wiping her eyes with the provided napkin. "I was driving around trying to figure out what to do, and I saw your sign. It said community table, and I thought maybe I could sit somewhere that felt like community, even if I'm not actually part of any community right now." Michael nodded, understanding completely. Sometimes that's exactly what we need. A place that feels like belonging, even when we're figuring out where we actually belong. Over the next few minutes, the woman, Lisa, shared pieces of her story. A recent divorce, a job loss, children spending the summer with their father while she tried to rebuild her life. The overwhelming loneliness of eating meals alone, of having no one to share daily experiences with, of feeling disconnected from any sense of community or purpose. "I keep thinking I should be stronger than this," she said. "I should be able to handle this transition without falling apart in restaurants." "Strength isn't about handling things alone," Michael replied. "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you need connection, support, other people." Rosa appeared at their table, as if summoned by some invisible signal, settling into a third chair with the easy grace of someone who had done this thousands of times before. "I'm Rosa," she said simply. "I coordinate some of the support services. Here, Michael's absolutely right about strength and community. Would you be interested in hearing about some of the groups we have for people navigating life transitions?" An hour later, Lisa had signed up for the divorce support group that met weekly, exchanged numbers with Emma for cooking lessons, and had been invited to join the community garden project as a way to meet people in a low-pressure environment. She left with a container of Elena's soup, a schedule of upcoming events, and an expression that had shifted from despair to cautious hope. "You make it look so effortless," Sarah observed to Michael as they watched Lisa leave with Rosa, who was walking her to her car and continuing their conversation. "It's not effortless," Michael replied. "It's just practice. 5 years of practice at seeing people, really seeing them, and responding to what they actually need rather than what we think they should need." The afternoon brought the delegation from Portland, a group of restaurant owners, social workers, and city planners interested in replicating the community table model in their own city. Sarah led them through a comprehensive tour, explaining not just what they did, but how and why. "It worked. The key insight," she told the group as they sat in the demonstration kitchen watching Alex teach a knife skills class to a group of teenagers, was realizing that food service and social service aren't separate industries. They're two aspects of the same human need for nourishment, connection, and care. One of the visitors, a restaurant owner named David, raised his hand. "But how do you maintain quality control when you have so many different functions happening in one space? How do you keep it from feeling chaotic?" Emma, who had been quietly observing the tour, spoke up. "It's like cooking," she said. "A good meal has lots of different ingredients and techniques, but they all work together to create something cohesive. You just have to understand how all the pieces fit." The visitor nodded thoughtfully. "And the financial model? How do you make the numbers work?" Michael pulled up a presentation he had given countless times. "Traditional restaurants operate on very thin profit margins, often failing within the first few years. We discovered that by expanding our definition of value beyond just food sales, we could create multiple revenue streams that work together." He explained how the restaurant generated income through traditional food service, catering for local businesses and events, grants and donations for the social services component, fees for consulting with other organizations wanting to replicate their model, and partnerships with local institutions. "More importantly," Rosa added, "we found that people are willing to pay slightly higher prices when they know their money is going towards something that benefits the entire community. Our cost per meal is about 15% higher than comparable restaurants, but our customer loyalty and retention rates are significantly higher." One of the social workers in the delegation, a woman named Patricia, asked about the challenges they'd faced in integrating services. The biggest challenge, Rosa replied, was learning to balance boundaries. Early on, we had some staff who felt like they needed to be therapists, counselors, and friends to everyone who walked in. We had to develop clear protocols about when to refer to professional services, how to maintain appropriate relationships with customers, and how to take care of ourselves while taking care of others. Sarah nodded. We also had to navigate regulatory issues. Having therapeutic services in a restaurant space required working with state licensing boards, health departments, and insurance companies who didn't have existing frameworks for this kind of integrated model. But the most important lesson, Michael added, was that this model only works if it grows organically from the needs of your specific community. You can't just transplant what we've done here and expect it to work somewhere else. You have to listen to your community, understand what they need, and build something that serves those specific needs. As the delegation concluded their tour and prepared to leave, Emma approached the group with a question that surprised the adults. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "When you go back to Portland and think about starting something like this, what scares you the most?" The question was met with thoughtful silence before David answered. "I think what scares me most is that it might not work, that we might fail at creating something meaningful." "What if I told you that failure is built into this model?" Emma replied, "We fail at something every day. We have conversations that don't go well, programs that don't serve people the way we hoped, initiatives that cost more than they bring in. But we fail forward. We learn from what doesn't work, and we try again." Patricia smiled at Emma's wisdom. "How old are you?" 13, but I've been learning from really good teachers for a long time." That evening, after the delegation had left and the dinner service had concluded, the core team gathered around one of the large tables for their weekly reflection meeting. This was a tradition that had started in the early days and continued even as the restaurant had grown and evolved. "What went well this week?" Sarah asked, beginning the familiar ritual. "The new Teen Entrepreneur program launched successfully," Alex reported. "We have 6 kids working on food-related business plans, and the mentorship matches with local business owners are working really well." "The financial literacy workshops are at capacity," Rosa added. "And we had 3 families successfully complete the path from crisis support to stable housing this month. Mrs. Chen's Tai Chi classes in the garden are so popular, we might need to add a second session," Elena noted. "And the intergenerational cooking program continues to have a waiting list." Michael looked around the table at these people who had become his chosen family. "Emma taught a knife skills workshop to the Portland delegation today, and I realized I'm watching her become the kind of teacher I always hoped she'd be, but never could have imagined the context for." Emma blushed, but didn't protest. Over the years, she had naturally grown into a role that was part chef, part teacher, part community organizer. Her summers were spent working full-time at the restaurant, and even during the school year, she was there most afternoons and weekends. "What about challenges?" Sarah continued. "We're still struggling with space," Michael admitted. "The demand for services is growing faster than our ability to accommodate everyone comfortably." "The city council is supportive of the expansion proposal," Rosa said, "but the funding is still uncertain. The expansion they were discussing would add a 3rd floor to the building, creating dedicated spaces for counseling, workshops, and community meetings. It would also allow them to offer temporary housing for people in crisis, something they'd been wanting to do for years." "I have an idea about that," Emma said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her, accustomed now to her insights being valuable regardless of her age. "What if we approached expansion differently? Instead of just making this building bigger, what if we created satellite locations? Not full restaurants, but community kitchens in different neighborhoods that could offer some of the same services on a smaller scale. Sarah raised her eyebrows. That's actually a really innovative approach, distributed impact rather than centralized growth. We could partner with existing community centers, libraries, schools, Michael added, building on Emma's idea. Provide consultation and training, help them develop their own programs tailored to their neighborhoods. Rosa nodded enthusiastically. And we could create a network effect where people participating in one location could access resources from the others, a true community web rather than just a single hub. The conversation continued for another hour, with ideas building on ideas, possibilities multiplying as they imagined how their model could evolve and spread while maintaining its core values. As the meeting concluded and people began to gather their things, Sarah stopped Emma before she could leave. That satellite kitchen idea was brilliant, she said. Have you been thinking about that for a while? Emma shrugged. I just keep wondering how we can help more people without losing what makes this place special. And I've been reading about network theory in my computer science class, about how distributed systems can be more resilient than centralized ones. You know, Sarah said thoughtfully, when I first met your father, I had no idea that trusting him with this restaurant would someday mean learning business strategy from his teenage daughter. Is that weird for you? Emma asked. It's wonderful. It reminds me that the best ideas often come from unexpected places, from people who see things differently because they're coming from different experiences. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Michael was in the kitchen reviewing the day's prep list when Marcus, now the assistant manager, approached with a puzzled expression. There's a man here asking for you specifically, he said. Says his name is Sal Romano, and that you'll know what that means. Michael's head snapped up. Sal Romano, the owner of the Deli in Chicago, where Michael had worked washing dishes, where they'd met Sarah that snowy night years ago. He hadn't spoken to Sal since they'd left Chicago, though Sarah had mentioned visiting him occasionally. Michael hurried to the dining room, where he found an older man with graying hair and tired eyes, looking around the restaurant with wonder. Sal, what are you doing here? Sal's face broke into a smile as he saw Michael. Mickey Chen, look at you, all grown up and running a place like this. They embraced, and Michael was immediately transported back to those difficult days in Chicago, to the small acts of kindness that had sustained him and Emma when they had nowhere else to go. How did you find us? Sarah told me what you'd built here. I was passing through on my way to visit my sister in Montreal and thought I'd take a detour to see it for myself. Sal looked around again, shaking his head. She didn't do it justice in her description. Michael insisted on giving Sal the full tour, introducing him to Emma, Rosa, Eleanor, and the rest of the staff. Sal listened with growing amazement as Michael explained how the restaurant operated, how the various programs worked together, how they'd managed to create financial sustainability while prioritizing community service. You know what's funny? Sal said as they sat down for lunch. That night you and your little girl shared your last meal with Sarah. I knew something special was happening, but I never could have imagined it would lead to this. Neither could I, Michael admitted. Sometimes I still can't believe it's real. Oh, it's real, all right. And it's exactly what the world needs more of. Sal paused, looking thoughtful. Actually, that's part of why I wanted to see you. My lease is up in 6 months, and I've been thinking about what to do next. I'm too old to run a restaurant the way I used to, but I'm not ready to retire completely. Michael sensed there was more to this conversation than casual visiting. What are you thinking? Well, I've got 40 years of experience feeding People, a loyal customer base, and a location that's been a community gathering place for decades. What I don't have is the vision to transform it into something bigger, something that serves people the way this place does. The implications of what Sal was suggesting began to dawn on Michael. Are you asking if we'd be interested in helping you reimagine Romano's? I'm asking if you'd be interested in coming home to Chicago and showing people there what you've learned here. Michael felt his breath catch. The idea of returning to Chicago, of taking everything they'd learned and applying it in the place where their journey had begun, was both terrifying and exhilarating. Sal, I don't know what to say. This is our home now. Emma's whole life is here. The community we've built, the responsibilities we have. I understand that, and I'm not asking you to abandon what you've built here. But Sarah's restaurant empire proves that you can have multiple locations, each adapted to its own community, all connected by shared values and practices. That evening, Michael found himself unable to concentrate on his usual tasks. The conversation with Sal had stirred something in him, a sense of possibility mixed with uncertainty. During dinner, he shared the conversation with Emma, Sarah, and Rosa. Chicago? Emma mused. I barely remember living there. It's where your mother and I met, Michael said softly. It's where you were born, where we lived until everything fell apart and led us here, Emma finished, which led to everything good that's happened since. Sarah set down her fork, considering. The Chicago market is completely different from Burlington. Much more complex, much more challenging, but also with much more potential for impact. Are you saying we should do it? Rosa asked. I'm saying we shouldn't dismiss it out of hand. Michael, what does your gut tell you? Michael thought for a moment. My gut tells me that we've proven something here that could be valuable in a lot of places. But I also worry about overextending ourselves, about losing focus on what we've built. What if we treated it like Emma's satellite kitchen idea? Rosa suggested. Not a duplication of the community table, but an adaptation of our principles to a different context, a different community. Emma, who had been quiet throughout most of the conversation, suddenly spoke up. I want to see where we came from. I want to meet Sal and see the place where you and Sarah first met. And I want to know if we can help people there the way we've helped people here. That simple statement from his daughter crystallized something for Michael. This wasn't just about business expansion or proving a concept. It was about coming full circle, about taking everything they'd learned and offering it back to the community that had, in its way, made it all possible. Over the following weeks, they developed a plan. Michael and Emma would spend the summer in Chicago working with Sal to transform Romano's Deli into Romano's community kitchen. Sarah would split her time between Burlington, Chicago, and her other locations, providing consultation and support. Rosa would remain in Burlington to maintain the programs there while developing training materials for the Chicago staff. The plan was ambitious and complicated, but it felt right in a way that surprised everyone involved. Are you nervous? Emma asked Michael the night before they were scheduled to leave for Chicago. Terrified, he admitted, but also excited. When was the last time you felt like you were about to embark on a real adventure? Every day here feels like an adventure, Emma replied, but I know what you mean. This feels bigger, more uncertain. Are you having second thoughts? Emma shook her head. No, I think Mom would love the idea of us going back to help people in the place where our story started. And besides, someone has to make sure you don't make any major decisions without consulting the next generation. Michael laughed, pulling his daughter into a hug. When did you get so wise? I had good teachers. The farewell gathering at the community table was emotional but celebratory. Customers who had become friends, staff who had become family, community members whose lives had been touched by the restaurant's work, all came together to wish Michael and Emma well on their new adventure. Sarah gave a toast that captured the spirit of the moment. 5 years ago, we thought we were just opening a restaurant. We thought we understood what success would look like. But what we learned is that the best ventures are the ones that grow beyond your original vision, that take on a life of their own, driven by the needs of the community they serve. She raised her glass. To Michael and Emma, who are about to prove that good ideas, like good food, travel well when prepared with love and adapted to local taste. As Michael looked around the room at the faces of people whose lives had intersected with theirs in meaningful ways, he felt a deep satisfaction mixed with anticipation. The community table would continue to thrive under Sarah and Rosa's leadership, serving the Burlington community that had embraced it so completely. But Chicago represented something different, a chance to test whether what they'd built was truly replicable, whether the principles they'd discovered could take root in different soil and still produce something nourishing. Emma squeezed his hand. "Ready, Dad?" Michael squeezed back. "Ready." Dumb. As they prepared to leave Vermont for their summer in Chicago, Michael reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that snowy night when he'd shared his last $5 with a stranger, to becoming part owner of a restaurant that had become a model for community-centered business, to now preparing to return to their origins with new knowledge and purpose. The story that had begun with a simple act of kindness had grown into something none of them could have imagined. And now, as they prepared to write the next chapter, Michael felt the same mix of uncertainty and hope that had characterized every major transition in their lives. But this time, they weren't running from something or toward something unknown. They were carrying forward a proven vision, tested values, and the confidence that came from having done this work successfully. They were returning home not as the people who had left, but as the people they had become through service, community, and the radical idea that feeding people well meant nourishing all of their needs, not just their hunger. The morning of their departure to Chicago arrived with unexpected rain, as if Vermont itself was reluctant to let them go. Michael stood at the window of their apartment, watching water streak down the glass, each drop seeming to carry the weight of memories made in this place. Emma moved quietly around the room, packing the last of her things, her movements careful and deliberate in the way she'd learned to approach everything that mattered. "You know what's strange?" she said, folding a chef's jacket that Sarah had given her for her 13th birthday. "I'm more nervous about going back to Chicago than I was about leaving it." Michael turned from the window. "Why do you think that is?" Emma paused, considering. "When we left Chicago, I was too young to understand what we were losing. I just knew we were going somewhere new. But now I understand what it means to build something, to have roots, to be part of something bigger than yourself. Going back feels like testing whether everything we've learned here is real." It was a remarkably mature observation from someone still in middle school, but Emma had grown up in an environment where big questions were discussed openly, where children were treated as whole people capable of deep thought and meaningful contribution. "I think it's real," Michael said softly. "I think what we've learned here about how to see people, how to create community, how to meet people where they are, that's not dependent on this building or even this town. It's something we carry with us." Downstairs, the restaurant hummed with its usual morning energy, but there was an underlying current of anticipation. Staff members kept finding excuses to come upstairs, offering help with packing, sharing favorite memories, extracting promises to stay in touch. Rosa had organized a farewell breakfast, though she insisted it wasn't goodbye, just "see you later." As they carried their bags down to Sarah's car, Michael found himself taking inventory of everything they were leaving behind. The apartment. That had been Emma's first real bedroom in years. The garden where she'd learned to grow herbs and where Rosa held therapy sessions on sunny afternoons. The kitchen, where Emma had discovered her passion for cooking and where Elena had taught her that feeding people was an act of love. But more than the physical spaces, they were leaving behind a web of relationships that had sustained and shaped them. Mrs. Patterson, who had become like a grandmother to Emma, teaching her to knit and sharing stories of her own childhood. Dr. Williams, the retired veterinarian who volunteered at the community garden and had sparked Emma's interest in the science behind cooking. Marcus, who had become Michael's closest friend and confidant, someone who understood the weight of responsibility that came with caring for a community. Sarah stood beside the car, her own bags already loaded, ready to split her time between Burlington, Chicago, and her other restaurants. She watched Michael and Emma say their goodbyes with an expression that mixed pride with something that looked like maternal concern. "Having second thoughts?" she asked Michael quietly, as Emma hugged Elena for the third time. "About going? No. About everything we're asking of ourselves? Absolutely." "Good," Sarah replied. "The moment you stop questioning whether you're doing the right thing is the moment you stop paying attention to whether you actually are." Elena finally released Emma from their embrace and approached Michael. "You take care of our girl," she said, though it was unclear whether she meant Emma or Sarah. "All of them," Michael promised. Rosa was the last to say goodbye, pulling Michael aside as Emma loaded her final bag into the car. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for that first day when I showed up here desperate and afraid, when you and Emma made space for me without knowing who I was or what I could offer. You saved my life, but more than that, you gave me back my purpose." Michael shook his head. "Rosa, you transformed this place. You created something that serves hundreds of people. We're the ones who should be thanking you." "That's exactly what I mean," she smiled through tears. "You still don't see it, do you? The way you immediately look for what someone can contribute rather than what they need. The way you create space for people to become their best selves. That's not something you learn in business school. That's who you are." As they finally drove away from the community table, Emma pressed her face to the window, watching the building grow smaller until it disappeared around a corner. Michael felt something shift in his chest, a physical sensation of leaving home that he hadn't experienced since they'd first left Chicago years ago. But this time, he wasn't running from something. He was carrying something forward. The drive to Chicago gave them hours to talk, to process the magnitude of what they were attempting. Sarah shared stories of her early days building her restaurant empire, the failures and false starts that had taught her more than any success. Emma talked about her ideas for Romano's, her vision of how their model might adapt to a different kind of community. What if we're trying to replicate something that only worked because of the specific circumstances in Burlington? Michael wondered aloud as they crossed into Illinois. "Then we'll learn that," Emma replied pragmatically, "and we'll figure out what does work in Chicago. The point isn't to copy exactly what we did in Vermont. It's to apply what we learned about people, about community, about how food connects us." When they finally pulled into the parking lot behind Romano's Deli, Michael felt a jolt of recognition, mixed with disorientation. The building looked exactly the same, but he was seeing it through completely different eyes. 5 years ago, this had been a temporary refuge, a place to earn just enough money to keep going for another day. Now he was looking at it as a potential canvas for everything they'd learned about creating community through food. Sal emerged from the back door, moving more slowly than Michael remembered, but with the same genuine warmth that had characterized their previous interactions. He embraced Michael, then turned to Emma with obvious curiosity. "This can't be the little girl who used to do her homework at table 3, he said in amazement. Emma grinned. "I'm still doing homework, just different homework now." That evening, After a dinner of Sal's famous pastrami sandwiches and hours of walking through the Deli with fresh eyes, Michael and Emma sat in the small apartment above the restaurant that Sal had prepared for them. It was basic but clean, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that looked out onto the alley where Michael used to take his breaks. "Dad," Emma said as they unpacked their clothes, "I keep thinking about something Rosa said to me before we left." "What was that?" "She said that home isn't just a place you belong, it's a place where you help other people belong. I think that's what we're trying to do here, not to make Chicago feel like Burlington, but to help Chicago become more itself, more connected, more caring." Michael paused in his unpacking, struck by the wisdom in his daughter's words. "You know what? I think you've just articulated our mission better than any of us adults have managed to do." Over the following days, as they began working with Sal to reimagine Romano's, Michael found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. That snowy night when he'd shared his last meal with a stranger had set in motion a chain of events that he never could have imagined. Each act of kindness, each moment of connection, each decision to trust in something larger than immediate self-interest had built upon the others, creating something that was transforming not just individual lives, but entire communities. He thought about Sarah, sitting alone at that bus stop, convinced she had lost everything that mattered to her. He thought about Rosa, arriving in the snow with nothing but fear and determination. He thought about himself and Emma, learning that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another, better one. The community table had become more than a restaurant, more than a social service center, more than a business. It had become proof of concept for a different way of being in the world, a demonstration that businesses could prioritize people over profit without sacrificing success, that communities could care for their most vulnerable members, not out of charity, but out of recognition that everyone's well-being was interconnected. Now, standing in Romano's kitchen and watching Emma sketch ideas for how to rearrange the space to create better flow between cooking and dining areas, Michael realized that the true measure of what they'd built in Burlington wasn't whether it could survive their absence, but whether the principles they'd discovered could take root in new soil and grow into something equally beautiful but uniquely adapted to its environment. "You know what I figured out?" Emma said, looking up from her drawings. "That night when you shared our soup with Sarah wasn't just about being kind to a stranger. It was about recognizing that your story and her story were already connected, even before you knew it. Every act of kindness is like that. It's recognizing connections that already exist but haven't been acknowledged yet." Michael looked at his daughter, this remarkable young woman who had grown up understanding things that many adults never grasped, and felt a deep sense of gratitude for the path that had led them here. Not just for the success they'd achieved, or the lives they'd touched, but for the way their journey had revealed the fundamental truth that Emma had just articulated. We are all already connected, already responsible for each other's well-being, already part of the same larger story. The work they were about to begin in Chicago would be challenging, uncertain, sometimes frustrating, but it was also an opportunity to prove once again that the simple act of sharing what you have, of seeing people fully, of creating space for everyone to contribute their gifts, could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. As they prepared for bed that first night back in Chicago, Michael felt the same mixture of anxiety and excitement he'd experienced on their first night in Burlington. But this time, he also felt something else. The confidence that came from having done this work before, from understanding that success wasn't measured in profit margins, but in the number of people who felt seen, valued, and connected to something larger than themselves. Tomorrow would begin another chapter in their ongoing story, another test of whether kindness could be systematized, whether community could be intentionally created, whether a simple restaurant could become a catalyst for social change. But tonight, as Emma fell asleep in her new room and the sounds of Chicago filtered through their windows, Michael felt peaceful in the knowledge that whatever happened next, they were exactly where they were meant to be, doing exactly the work they were meant to do, carrying forward a vision that had been tested by time and proven worthy of replication. The circle was coming complete, but rather than ending, it was expanding, reaching out to touch new lives, create new connections, and prove once again that sometimes the smallest acts of human kindness can grow into something that changes the world, one meal at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.